A girl in the rain. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the narrow alley into a stream of dirty water. Neon lights from the alien quarter flickered weakly, their glow swallowed by the storm. Most people had gone inside hours ago, but a small crowd had gathered in one corner of the street. Callan noticed them as he passed. He had been walking home from his late shift at the repair docks, his boots splashing through shallow puddles. Normally, he ignored street trouble. He had learned long ago that helping strangers could get you killed. But tonight, something made him stop. The crowd was throwing things: rotten food, empty cans, even pieces of garbage torn from the street bins. The sound of insults and jeers. Cut through the rain dot at the center of it all was a girl. She stood with her back to a brick wall, barefoot in the freezing water. Her clothes, if they could be called that, were nothing more than torn fabric clinging to her thin frame. Her skin had a pale lavender hue, her wet hair falling in tangled strands down her shoulders. Mud streaked her arms, and bruises marked her neck, but she did not cry. Her eyes, large and luminous like polished glass, stared at the crowd without fear. She stood as still as a statue, rain running down her face, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. One man in the crowd shouted something in a language Callan didn't know, and laughter followed. Someone hurled a tin can that struck her shoulder with a sharp, metallic sound. She flinched slightly, but didn't move away. Callan felt his jaw tighten. He didn't know her species, maybe Zyri, maybe a mix, but he didn't care. He saw the way her thin arms shook in an eye. Cold. He saw the way she pressed her lips together to stop her teeth from chattering, and before he even realized it, his feet were moving. The crowd noticed him when he pushed through, water dripping from his coat. Some stepped back. Others simply stared. A few muttered curses under their breath. Callan stopped in front of her, close enough to see the small scar near her left eye. Her gaze shifted to him for a brief second, searching his face, but she said nothing. Slowly, without speaking, he unbuttoned his thick coat. The fabric was warm from his body heat. He took a step forward and draped it over her shoulders. It almost swallowed her whole. Her hands hesitated, but then she clutched the coat tightly around herself, pulling it close like a shield. "You're coming with me?" Callan said, his voice calm but firm. The crowd didn't argue. Humans weren't common here, but they had a reputation for being stubborn and dangerous when pushed. One by one, the onlookers drifted away, muttering as they disappeared into the rain. For a moment, there was only the sound of water splashing in the alley. The girl's lips parted slightly. "Why?" Her voice was quiet, carrying an accent he couldn't place. Callan shrugged. "Because it's cold. And you look like you've had enough of this place." She said nothing more, but when he turned to leave, she followed, her bare feet splashing in the puddles. She didn't try to walk beside him. Instead, she kept half a step behind, holding the edge of his coat so it wouldn't slip from her shoulders. The streets were nearly empty now, the storm chasing away the late-night vendors and drinkers. Callan led her through winding lanes, past shuttered shops and darkened doorways. Occasionally, she glanced over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow. They reached a small bridge that crossed a narrow canal. The water below was black and sluggish, carrying scraps of paper and floating trash. Callan slowed his steps, not wanting to push her too fast. "You got a name?" he asked. Dottie hesitated. "Sarah." "All right, Sarah. My place isn't far. You can warm up there." Her fingers tightened on the coat. "You shouldn't help me," she whispered. "They'll come for me. And now they'll come for you too." Callan almost stopped walking. There was something in her voice, fear, but also certainty. Still, he didn't turn back. "I've had worse visitors," he said, forcing a small smile. They continued in silence until his building came into view, a narrow, Three-story block wedged between a pawn shop and an old bakery. The dim light from his upstairs window made the place look even smaller inside. The air was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and engine oil. Callan hung his work gloves on the wall and turned to offer her a chair, but she remained near the door, as if ready to bolt at any moment. He didn't push her. "There's a towel on the counter. You can use it." Sarah stepped forward slowly, her bare feet making no sound on the floor. She picked up the towel, but didn't take off the coat. Instead, she dried her hair while keeping the fabric wrapped tight around her. Callan watched her for a moment, trying to guess what kind of trouble she was in. But before he could ask, she looked at him with those glass-like eyes and said, "You don't understand. They're not going to stop." The words hung in the warm air, carrying more weight than the rain outside. Asterisk, the walk through the storm. The ice. Rain had not slowed. It drummed against the cracked rooftops, raced down gutters, and splashed in the deep puddles that filled the crooked streets. Callan kept his pace steady, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. Sarah walked behind him, clutching his coat so tightly it looked like she feared the wind might rip it away. The streets of the alien quarter were a maze at night. Old signs hummed with dim light, their letters flickering between colors. Vents hissed out clouds of steam that curled into the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move. "Stay close," Callan said without looking back. She didn't answer, but her footsteps quickened. They passed a pair of tall insectoid traders standing under an awning. Their glowing eyes followed Sarah. But when they saw Callan, they turned away. Humans had that effect. Outsiders saw them as unpredictable, maybe even dangerous. Callan's apartment wasn't far, but he decided to take a longer route. Straight lines got you followed. Zigzags got you lost, if you knew the turns. The deeper they went into the side streets, the stranger the silence became. No voices, no footsteps behind them. Only the rain, but Sarah kept glancing into the dark. "Who's after you?" Callan finally asked, voice low. She hesitated. "People who own things, and people they think they own." Her words were soft, but they cut sharp in his mind. "You ran away," he guessed. A flicker of something pain maybe passed across her face. "I was thrown away." Callan didn't press for details. The alien quarter had rules, most of them. Unspoken. But one thing he knew, if someone was cast out here, they either vanished by morning or were found in the canals. They turned into a narrow lane, the air colder here. A metal door slammed shut somewhere in the dark. Callan's hand went into his coat pocket, not for a weapon, but for the small multi-tool he always carried. Sarah stopped suddenly. Callan looked back. She was staring at the far end of the lane. Through the curtain of rain, two shapes stood there, still watching. "Keep walking," he said quietly. She obeyed, but her steps were lighter now, her breathing slower, like someone trying not to make noise. The shapes didn't move. Then, as they turned a corner, Callan glanced back one last time, and they were gone. When they reached the street near his building, the smell of wet stone and fried food filled the air. A noodle stall hissed with steam as the old vendor cleaned. "His pans." He gave Callan a nod, but didn't speak. His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment before he looked away. Callan pushed open the door to the narrow stairwell. The smell of coffee and metal drifted down from above his apartment. As they climbed, Sarah broke the silence. "You shouldn't have stopped for me." "Why not?" "Because I'm not the one they really want," she said. "You are now." Callan reached the top, unlocked his door, and stepped inside. He looked back at her, rainwater dripping from her hair onto his floor. "Too late for that," he said. He closed the door softly, but with the sound of finality. Asterisk. The first meal of the apartment was small, but it was warm. A single lamp glowed in the corner, casting soft light over the worn furniture and shelves stacked with tools. The hum of a small heater filled the silence. Callan stepped inside, kicked off his boots, and hung his wet jacket on a hook. Sarah lingered near the door, still clutching his coat around her. Rain dripped from her hair onto the floor. "You can sit," he said, nodding toward the chair near the table. She didn't move. Her eyes scanned the room, one window, one door, no other exits. It was the way someone looked when they had lived. In places where danger could come from any side, Callan walked into the small kitchen space and lit the old stove. The smell of cooking oil rose as he cracked eggs into a pan and tore open a packet of dried noodles. "You eat noodles?" he asked. She tilted her head, as if the question was strange. "I eat what I'm given." "Then you'll eat these," he said. As the water boiled, the sound of rain against the window softened, though it still poured outside. The heater's warmth crept into the air, and slowly, Sarah's shoulders loosened under the coat. When the food was ready, Callan placed a steaming bowl in front of her. The noodles glistened in the light, steam curling upward. She hesitated, looking from the food to him. "It's not poisoned," he said dryly. Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. She took the spoon and began to eat. Her movements were careful at first, then faster, as if her body had finally remembered how hungry it was. Callan sat across from her, eating his own bowl in silence. After a few minutes, she spoke. "My name is Sarah." "I know," he said. "You told me." She gave a small nod, as if confirming that she had, in fact, said it. "And you, Callan?" Sarah swallowed another bite, then glanced toward the door. "They'll knock before sunrise." He paused mid-bite. "How do you know?" "They follow patterns," she said simply. "First they search the streets. Then they check the shelters. Then the ones who offer help." Callan's eyes narrowed. "So you think they know you're here already?" Her answer was a slow nod. A low rumble of thunder rolled over the city. Outside, the street was quiet, but Callan noticed her gaze was fixed on the window, on the reflection of the hallway beyond the open door. Without turning his head, he reached over and shut the door to the hall. The click of the latch seemed loud in the small room. Sarah kept eating, but her shoulders had tensed again. "Finish your food," he said. "Then we'll figure out what's next." Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, there was something in them that wasn't just fear, something like trust, or the fragile beginning of it. But that moment broke when 3 sharp knocks echoed against the front door. The chase in the back streets. The knocks came again, harder this time. Callan froze, his spoon halfway to his mouth. Sarah had already stopped eating. Her hand gripped the edge of the table, so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "Don't answer," she whispered. He stood slowly, moving to the side of the window. Without letting himself be seen, he glanced down toward the street. 2 figures stood at the base of the stairwell, tall, broad, and dressed in dark coats that didn't match the weather. One had something slung over his shoulder. "Not an umbrella. They found you fast," Callan murmured. Sarah's voice was barely a breath. "I told you." They watched the helpers. A third knock shook the door. This one wasn't polite, it was a warning. Callan stepped back into the kitchen. "We're leaving." Sarah blinked. "Through the door? He'll see—" "Not the door." He pointed to the small back window near the counter. Rain splashed against the glass as Callan shoved it open. The air outside was colder than before, cutting like knives. He swung his legs out first, then held a hand toward her. She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the front door, where the sound of metal scraping at the lock began. "Now," Callan urged. She slid across the counter and into his grip. The alley below smelled of wet stone and rust. They landed quietly, but not quietly enough. From above, a voice shouted in a harsh alien tongue. Callan didn't wait to hear the rest. "Move!" They ran through the narrow alley, water splashing at their ankles. The sound of boots hit the ground behind them. The rain turned the streets slick, the puddles deep. Callan led Sarah through a maze of side passages, always keeping one hand free to push her forward or pull her out of the way. They passed under a rusted archway and into a market lane. The stalls were closed, tarps flapping wildly in the wind. The smell of rotting fruit hung in the air. "Faster," Callan urged, but the pursuers were quick, their footsteps echoing louder with each turn. A shout rang out, followed by the metallic hiss of a weapon being primed. Sarah gasped. "They're armed. I noticed." Callan spotted an open drainage grate just ahead. Without warning, he grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward it. "Down," he said. She didn't question him. They dropped into the narrow tunnel below, the sound of rushing water filling their ears. The space was cramped, the ceiling low, but it gave them cover. The pounding footsteps above slowed, voices muttering in frustration. In the dim glow of a distant maintenance light, Callan met Sarah's eyes. "You said they want you. Why?" Her breath was shaky. "Because I know something. Something they can't let anyone tell." Before he could ask more, a splash echoed in the tunnel behind them. Someone else had dropped down. Asterisk. The stand in the warehouse, the splash behind them was close, too close. Callan didn't waste time. "Go," he whispered, pushing Sarah forward through the narrow tunnel. The water here was ankle-deep and icy, flowing toward a faint orange glow. At the far end, they emerged into a side street and darted across it, slipping between two abandoned buildings. The air inside was thick with dust and the faint smell of old machine oil. The place was a warehouse empty, except for a few rusted crates and a long-dead forklift. Rain tapped against the broken skylights high above. Sarah clutched his coat tighter. "Why here?" "Because they'll expect us to run," Callan said. "Not to stop." He scanned the room quickly, mind racing. His old military habits took. Overcheck entrances, count cover spots, look for anything that could be turned into a weapon. The front door banged open. Two shadows slipped inside. Callan moved fast, pulling Sarah behind a stack of crates. He whispered, "Stay down. No matter what happens, don't move until I say." Her wide eyes followed him as he slipped away into the dark. The first pursuer stepped into the open, a heavy plasma pistol in his grip. The second hung back, scanning the shadows. From above, a faint creak sounded, the rusted support beams groaning under weight. Then Callan dropped from the upper catwalk, slamming into the first man with enough force to knock the weapon away. It skidded across the concrete and clattered into the shadows. The second pursuer aimed his weapon, but Callan was already moving, rolling behind a crate, grabbing an old length of pipe from the floor. The alien fired, the blast scorching the metal where Callan's head had been a heartbeat ago. The smell of burned steel filled the air. Callan hurled the pipe. It struck the alien's wrist, making him drop his gun. In the same motion, Callan closed the distance, landing a hard elbow to the chest and sending the alien sprawling. Sarah had not moved from her spot, but her gaze followed him. Something new in her expression, something almost like belief. Breathing hard, Callan picked up one of the fallen weapons and checked the charge. It was nearly full. He walked back to her and handed it over. "If anyone else comes through that door, point this at them and pull the trigger." Her fingers closed around the weapon slowly. "You're protecting me." He smirked faintly. What gave it away? But before she could answer, a sound rose outside, the growl of more engines, closer now. Sarah looked at him sharply. "That's not just a patrol. That's everyone. Asterisk, the coat that changed everything. The engines outside roared louder, their sound bouncing off the wet walls of the street. Headlights swept across the cracks in the warehouse door. Callan didn't wait for them to kick it in. He grabbed Sarah's hand. We're moving, now. They slipped through a side passage where the wall had caved in years ago. Rain poured in, soaking them instantly. Outside, the alley was a jagged path between broken buildings, the shadows deep and shifting. Voices shouted behind them. Boots pounded on wet stone. Sarah clutched the plasma pistol he had given her, glancing back every few steps. Where are we going? Somewhere they won't follow, Callan said. They reached the mouth of the alley beyond it, a wide street leading toward the human sector. A checkpoint loomed in the distance, its guard tower lit with white floodlights. But between them and safety stood 3 black transports, engines running, their doors sliding open. Armed figures stepped out. Sarah stopped. There's too many. Callan's eyes scanned the street. He didn't see numbers. He saw positions, cover points, and escape lines. Old habits burned into his bones. On my mark, you run, he said. Don't stop. Don't look back. But do it, Sarah. His tone left no space for argument. When the nearest alien raised his weapon, Callan moved, darting into the open, drawing their fire. He grabbed a crate from the nearest transport and hurled it toward a fuel drum. The impact sent sparks flying, followed by a deafening humph as flames exploded upward. The sudden blaze lit the street like daylight. Shouts erupted. In the chaos, Sarah ran, the coat flapping behind her. 2 pursuers broke off to chase her, but Callan was there, slamming one into a wall, wrenching the weapon from the other, and firing a stun bolt that dropped him instantly. Sarah reached the checkpoint first. The human guards saw the bruises, the torn clothes, the alien pursuers in the firelight, and pulled her inside without hesitation. Callan staggered in seconds later, drenched, breathing hard. The gates slammed. Shut behind them. It was over. The alien transports pulled back, their engines fading into the rain. Whatever danger Sarah carried with her, it would have to wait another day. Inside the guardhouse, a medic wrapped her in a dry blanket. She looked at Callan, her voice quiet but steady. You didn't have to do all that. Yeah, he said, sitting down heavily. But I wanted to. She reached into the blanket and pulled off his coat, holding it toward him. You should take this back. It's yours. He pushed it gently back into her arms. Keep it. You're not going back. To the cold again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain beat against the windows, but it sounded far away. Now Sarah wrapped the coat tighter around herself, not because of the cold, but because it was the first thing in a long time that felt like safety. And sitting across from her, Callan knew something had changed. He hadn't just saved her life, he had taken responsibility for it. The coat was only the beginning. Asterisk.